Good afternoon. Today I'd like to talk to you all about how ADHD affects relationship communication. Now, I like to believe that we can all agree that communication is hard enough in relationships without having a mental illness that affects the way your brain processes information as well as the way you communicate. So to start us off, I'd like to talk about the two types of relationships, personal and social. Both of these can be voluntary or involuntary. Personal voluntary relationships are partners, such as boyfriends and girlfriends. Personal involuntary relationships are siblings, parents, things like that. A social involuntary relationship would be something like a coworker or an acquaintance, somebody that's not quite as close to you. And a social involuntary relationship would be something like a neighbor. You really don't talk to these people that often. They're not very close. They don't really know the details of your life. Moving on from there, I'd like to talk about the stages of relationships. So first up, we have the initiating stage. This is where people first meet each other and you usually will say hey or hello or how are you doing. After that comes the experimenting stage. In this stage, a basic exchange of information is given. This is nothing intimate, just basic. After that comes the intensifying stage. This is where a little bit more intimacy comes into play. From there, we go to the integrating stage, and this is typically where you start hearing people call couples by both of their names. So let's invite Dan and Jessica to dinner. Let's take Claire and Emily out with us. Things like that. After that, you have the bonding stage. Now, this is exclusive to romantic relationships. This is a public commitment ceremony, such as a wedding, an engagement, or a civil union. From there, we start to see relationships deteriorate a little bit in the differentiating stage. In this stage, individual differences become the primary focus of the relationship. And from there, we move on to circumscribing. In this stage, communication declines rapidly, and people start to vocally close each other off completely. From there, you get worse as you move into the stagnating stage. This is a very, very awkward stage as communication is basically closed off altogether. From there, we move into avoiding stages. Now, this stage is a little less awkward. It really ends that awkwardness of the stagnating stage. However, this can come in an indirect or direct form. A direct form would be somebody saying, I don't want to talk to you anymore, stop. An indirect form would be somebody saying, I have somewhere to be, or I need to make a phone call. Some way of getting out of the conversation without having to confront you about it. Our last stage is the terminating stage. And like the name suggests, this is where the relationship comes to an end altogether. This typically occurs due to geographical changes or changes in morals and values. It's not always the case, but typically this is. And it is important to note that while I mentioned these in chronological order, they do not always happen that way. Some stages may come before others, some may come after others, and it is really important to know that this is not just exclusive to romantic relationships, but also to platonic as well. From there, I'd like to talk about a little bit more about ADHD. So ADHD is classified into 3 different categories. The first being hyperactive and impulsive. This is where you typically think of ADHD. You have small children who are very, very active, cannot sit still for long periods of time. The impulsiveness comes out in, they may be speaking out of turn, they may be saying inappropriate things at the wrong time. They could be snatching items without asking for them, things of that nature. The inattentive presentation is second. This is what we would typically classify as ADD. This presents itself as an inability to focus. So people that have this struggle really bad with sitting for long periods of time and focusing on work for long periods of time. They may daydream a lot. They may wander off in their head. It's just very, very hard for them to focus. And the third presentation is a combination. And like the name suggests, this is a combination of the hyperactive impulsivity and the inattentiveness. And it is also important to note with ADHD that while a lot of doctors classify inattentive and hyperactive as 2 sets of ADHD, a lot will also link them together under one. Another important note is that while people mature in age, these presentations may change. You may have a child who is hyperactive at an early age and becomes inattentive as they grow and as they mature. From there, I'd like to talk a little bit about how ADHD affects communication. So there's two types of communication we have here. We have external communication patterns and internal communication patterns. Within these two types, you have specific and general types. So external general communication would be something like somebody not vocalizing their disdain. So they may not say no right away. They may hold these feelings in, and they may also just not respond well to feelings of sadness. They may push it down. External specific communication patterns look a lot like avoiding sensitive topics with loved ones. So whether that be, not talking to a father figure about how angry they are, or on a little bit more intimate note, they may not communicate well with their partner about their sex life and their sex issues. Internal general communication patterns typically are seen as overanalyzing. This is where you'll find a lot of people will think of every possible scenario before making a decision. And this is a lot of times seen within people that have the inattentive type. The second example of internal specific communication patterns, this looks more like maladaptive coping skills and is very similar to the external general communication patterns. They don't respond well to sadness. They may push it down. These two are very similar, but internal specific communication patterns have more to do with coping skills than how they're responding to the feelings. As far as that goes, when people have this inability to focus, this can cause a lot of problems as far as listening. So a partner may be speaking to them and they may be hearing them, but because they are not actively listening, they don't remember these things later. Or a partner may be trying to tell a story and, if they have this impulsive presentation, these people may cut their partners off, and this can come off really rude. And it does cause a lot of problems within the communication. So I do hope you learned a little bit more about how ADHD works and how the communication process works and types of relationships there are. Thank you.